Welcome back to Weights and Wealth. You've got Nick Rafferty, the accountant, and Ted Rohr, the personal trainer here. And my beautiful fiance, Alex, is producing the show for us today. She was telling us that we need to talk about ourselves more, give people some stories, tell them who we are. So I guess I'll talk about when I asked Nick to be my best man. Mm-hmm. I told Nick after that conversation that I loved him, as two close guy friends should often do. But I think that's something that guys don't do a very good job of doing. We don't really tell each other, I love you, very often because it's not manly or something. I don't know. But I think that that's something that as men is important to do to the important people in your life.
Yeah. And if it does feel kind of weird, I have told, some of my very close friends that I love them. It feels a little bit unnatural,
romantic.
But I think it's important to do. Yeah. It's a different kind of love. I mean, I know there are 3 types of love. I remember learning about this in school or church. I did not look them up ahead of time, but there's the unconditional love, which is, God for us, hopefully husband for a wife, mother for a child, stuff like that. There is brotherly love, which is, friendships. And then there is lustful love, which is supposedly like the lowest form. Yeah. It's pretty self-explanatory, just lusting after somebody.
With the unconditional love that you mentioned, that you said mother for child, that made me think about also, since this is a podcast geared towards young men, how it seems like men have to earn love, whereas women and children are kind of given unconditional love. I feel like there's a little bit of a difference sometimes when you're growing up as a young man, where you feel like you have to earn love from everyone in your life.
Where your worth is based on what you do. Is that what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah, more of like your value is based on like everything you bring to the table. I don't know. Do you feel that in any way, or?
I mean, growing up, I definitely did feel pressure to perform well in whatever I was doing. I wasn't raised as a girl, so I can't speak from that angle.
Are you telling me that you knew your gender from birth?
I did. I actually did. Yeah.
So lucky.
Did you?
I think so. Yeah. Society is quite crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Although I have been, since we're on the topic, I have been seeing stuff about people detransitioning recently. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, I'm not going to call it a trend, but I've been seeing a lot more about it, where somebody will transition and then regret it and then go back.
Mm-hmm. There's a huge subreddit for detransitioning, right? And it got a lot of hate at some point. If you watch What is a Woman on the Daily Wire, it's really eye-opening into that whole conversation with the transitioning and detransitioning. Have you seen that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's by Matt Walsh with the Daily Wire. But it's a very, very interesting documentary. And he just goes around and asks people, professors, doctors, about the whole subject of what is a woman, and talks to someone who transitioned. And it's a very interesting short documentary. And he just asks people questions. He doesn't interject his own opinions or views into it. So it's pretty interesting.
So is this like a series kind of that he does, or is it just one episode or one?
Maybe 80, 90 minutes? Yeah. 80 or 90 minute documentary on Daily Wire.
Huh.
Yeah. What's our topic today, Nick?
Our topic is about ego spending and ego lifting.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah. So at least from the ego lifting perspective, I definitely used to do that. I still do it a little bit. I try not to.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, Ted might have a little story from a couple weeks ago about.
So when I got out of Ranger school, my body was, I don't want to say broken, but was not functioning optimally, especially my knees and my hips. So I knew what I was supposed to do when I got out of Ranger School. I was rehabbing, especially my lower body with my knees and my hips. My shoulders were okay, but I was doing a lot of rehab and started off really slow, getting back into lifting. And then my first maybe 4 or 5 weeks, I was doing kind of like a higher rep, lower weight, kind of 15 to 20 rep range to get back into the swing of things, get back into the movements of the compound lifts, get back in the groove for a squat and a deadlift. But then after that 4 or 5 week period, I just wanted to lift heavy. I was like, all right, I'm feeling pretty good. Pain is going away from my hips and my knees. I got this. And so I went into 8 to 12 rep range, and I hate doing a lot of volume on squats and deadlifts. I prefer to just do singles, doubles, triples, just kind of leave it at that. But to get back into the swing of things, I was doing the 8 to 12 rep range, and I wound up herniating a disc because I went way too aggressive on a deadlift. I did like 315 4x8 deadlift, which for us pretty easy. We were doing that maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I jumped to 355, and then I jumped in that same workout to 385, and it was way too aggressive of a jump. I didn't have the movement pattern back down yet, I guess, and I just could feel it in my back. It's the first time it's ever happened to me, but I could kind of feel it just like come apart. It was a really weird feeling. And then after that, I had a lot of pain, and so I've been rehabbing that for the past couple months, and then just got back to deadlifting 315 again yesterday. And a herniated disc is not the end of your lifting career. Most of us have herniated discs already, and we just don't know it. I did a post on imaging and MRIs and like soft tissue injuries on Ted's Lift Help. And the stats, I don't remember them exactly. I'll throw the graphic up in post-production for those that are watching. But it was something like 70% of us that lift or do contact sports have herniated discs, and we just don't know it. They're not painful. We just walk around and continue to live our life. And so whenever you have an injury like this happen, it's not the end of your career. You can rehab it. And as long as you're following a good program to get out of it, you can outfunction bad structure, as my professor, Dr. Jordan Shallow, says. If you take a pre-script class, one of the things that they communicate is that you can outfunction bad structure, meaning if something's injured, you can build up the muscles and rely on the muscles around that poor structure to still have good function and still move pain-free and move properly. So just been a little bit of a journey coming out of that ego lifting mistake, coming back into doing heavy deadlifts again. It's taken a little bit of time, but I'm getting my mobility back. I'm able to have now like lumbar flexion extension without pain, and I'm just slowly working back into everything. But
yeah, I had something similar happen to me at sophomore year of college, and this is why I probably won't ever truly max a deadlift again. I was maxing out and I completely cat backed this weight off the ground, and I pulled what's that muscle that runs to the side of your spine?
Quadratus lumborum.
Yes.
Yep.
So I pulled it on the right side. It was excruciatingly painful. I did still re-rack my weights because I am a good citizen of the gym. Although I probably shouldn't have, because putting the weights back was just incredibly painful. But that has kind of scared me to really fully max a deadlift again. I mean, I do go to heavy singles.
One of the conversations that should be had here around this whole deadlifting conversation is the importance of rounded back training in your programming. Generally with a beginner, if we're talking about the form that they're using on something like a row, I'll teach them to retract and depress with their shoulders, and we'll do a very upwardly postured row. But as soon as I get someone to learn how to move their shoulder blades, I'll progress them into rounded back training, where maybe we're doing a T-bar row and we're having our shoulder blades protracted and forward, and then we're coming all the way through the row and getting the full co-contraction of all the muscles in the back. Because in daily life, whether you're a 25-year-old guy and you're moving your stuff from an apartment into a new apartment, or you're a 33-year-old new mom and you're picking up your toddler, these things in daily life, you're going to bend over and round your back to pick things up. So in the gym, it doesn't make sense to always lift with a neutral spine. Of course, to generate power and brace properly for a lot of lifts, we're going to want to keep that neutral spine, but it's also important to train flexion and extension in your spine as well. If you want to learn more about that, Kevin Nowacki, my friend from Elevate PT and Performance, we'll tag him in here. He's got a lot of good information on that as well. But
yeah, I think that kind of training has been growing in popularity. I haven't done too much of it myself. When I do rows, I do tend to fully extend and go all the way down. But I haven't done too much of it with deadlifting. I know I follow Dawson Wyndham. Do you know who he is?
You've showed me his account before.
Yeah, he's a very, very strong guy. Not sure if I think he does compete in powerlifting. He's from South Carolina. He actually has gone to Big Work Fitness a few times. I haven't seen him there, but I've seen his stories. But he does a lot of deadlift training like that, and I want to incorporate it some way into my training. I'm just a little scared to. So I'll check out Kevin Nowacki's videos. Yeah.
Speaking of this whole deadlifting conversation and big work, when was it? It might have been right before Thanksgiving when I met Robert Oberst, the strongman at Big Work. I saw him, and it was so funny when I met him because in my head, I was like, there's no way that Robert Oberst is standing right next to me. But he's massive. He's like, who else could this be? So I'm looking at him, and I decided to go over and talk to him. But I didn't. If he wasn't Robert Oberst, I figured he got it a lot, that people thought he was. So I didn't want to say, hey, are you Robert Oberst? So I just started talking to him about strongman and strongman competitions and lifts. And after we were talking back and forth a little bit, I said, okay, so you are Robert Oberst, right? And he's like, yeah, who else would I be? But he's a really nice guy. But if you've seen his episode on Joe Rogan, you may know that he's not a fan of people deadlifting, which is an interesting take for a strongman to take. But that's because there is some risk involved with the deadlift. But at the same time, it's a great lift, especially if you're trying to build strength or muscle. And it's one of those things where you just gotta weigh the pros and the cons. But if you are worried about the risks involved with a deadlift, I tend to start all my clients on a trap bar deadlift because there's a lot less hip hinge and less range of motion where the lumbar spine is going to potentially go into flexion to fit yourself to the bar. You know, barbells, it might not make sense for everybody to do a barbell lift. You may need to modify it to your body. So whether that's using a trap bar on a deadlift instead of an Olympic bar, or using the safety squat bar in a squat to modify the lift a little bit. These are tools that we can use. You don't have to cram a square peg into a round hole with some of these lifts. But I think deadlifting is a very important lift, especially if we're trying to build muscle and gain some strength.
Yeah, and Ted also got me doing these single leg deadlifts recently with a dumbbell, and can't do too much weight, but I can tell that my balance is already starting to improve a lot, and that I feel a lot more stable on one leg than I did before, because I could hardly do one rep when you first showed me them, and
you're falling over.
Yeah, it's tough, but
it is tough. Yeah, single leg deadlifts or RDLs are fantastic exercise. We've talked before about the importance of putting some unilateral exercises into your programming. Something else that Jordan Shallow says is if you can't stand on one leg, you maybe shouldn't squat on two, right? So it's kind of that stability before strength principle. Very common with Prescript. If you check out Prescript, their tagline is mobility, stability, strength. So just building that capacity before you go into those compound lifts. And I guess we got here from not ego lifting into the compound lifts, but the compound lifts are important. Just don't ego lift with them. You know, they're great exercises for all skill levels. Just make sure you're following a program. That's the importance of being on a program, so you don't ego lift and wind up hurting yourself.
And we talk about hypertrophy a lot, and there are multiple ways to do it, and one of them is to have better form. So you don't always have to go heavier. If you improve your form, you are progressively overloading.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone that's getting into lifting out there, with beginners, if you start on something like a leg press that anyone can kind of get down on and start having an output on, you can build capacity through the output. You can divide exercises into output-based exercises and skill-based exercises. So if you start on a leg press, which is very easy to have output on, you just push, then you can, over time, work on the skill of a skill-based exercise, like a squat, while increasing your capacity on something like a leg press. So for beginners, that's generally what I would recommend. Start on the machines, but learn the free weights as you're starting on the machines. And there's free resources that we have at Ted's Lift Help for form with different exercises. And one of our projects is to eventually have all these exercises on YouTube that people can check out for help, but also find a personal trainer, ask them how to do an exercise, or have a friend show you the ropes. They might not know how to do everything perfectly. They might get some stuff wrong, but it's better to have someone that has experience trying to teach you how to do some of these lifts than just trying to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I got really lucky with when I started lifting is I was going to my school gym, and one of our gym teachers was the proctor, and he would just help all of us. I mean, awesome. I remember we all started out quarter squatting. Like seriously, our legs were going to like a 45-degree angle. And then he got this bucket out. I think I was squatting 185. And he said, your butt has to touch this bucket. And nobody could do it. We were all going around, bending our knees a little bit, squatting 185. But yeah, that's one thing I feel really lucky about, is that I had somebody to kind of teach me from the start.
Yeah, I didn't have anyone that was able to teach me, and I didn't hire a personal trainer when I started in high school. But something I did do was ask people questions, because I don't really mind going up to people and asking them questions and asking for help. And so I had a couple of friends in high school that were a lot bigger and stronger than I was. Shout out Jason Piacelli and Jacob Kalish. They answered a lot of my questions and helped me start to understand some of these principles. And then I started reading Mike Matthews from Legion back in the day when he had his Muscle for Life blogs. And then when I got to college, you and John Gutzmiedel, who was on the powerlifting team, really helped me with my form and got me into benching and deadlifting heavily. And then that's when I really started to see gains. But yeah, having someone who can teach you is so vital, and that's why I think having a personal trainer is so important if you have the funds to do that. Going into the wealth side of things today, we came up with the comparison that the kid in high school that's ego lifting and, as Nick said, cat backing a deadlift, he can't really actually lift that weight, and he's doing it with horrible form, ego lifting. That's just like someone that doesn't really have a lot of money buying Gucci or Louis Vuitton. I don't know, what is that? Is that clothes or handbags?
Both, I think. Yeah.
I'm not a fashion person. Someone buying that stuff and like flexing money even though they don't have it. It's ego spending. Ego spending is just the same as ego lifting. It's really dumb.
Yeah, and I personally don't really get the point. I mean, I feel like you're trying to just impress other people.
Yeah.
It might be higher quality, but it's mostly, I think, try to impress other people.
Yeah.
And there's always kind of been this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Mm-hmm. But I feel like with social media, it's gotten a lot more prevalent, because before, you would see your neighbors with a nicer car, bigger house, but now you see a highlight reel of everybody's life and you want to try to live like them. Mm-hmm. Even though a lot of these influencers supposedly don't actually or can't really afford what they're doing.
A lot of it's fake.
Go into debt, big credit card debt, and they're not actually really in a great financial position.
Would you like to make a pact right here?
What's the pact?
All right. Nick and I are going to make a pact that we're never going to take Weights and Wealth pictures on private jets or with Ferraris in the background.
Yes, I will happily make that.
No fake flexing here.
Yeah. But yeah, and then ego spending can also go into like expensive vacations, mm-hmm. Which, I mean, people enjoy those. And also when it comes to these things, there's a line between enjoying something and spending because of your ego. It isn't or not. It's important to spend your money where you want to spend it. You enjoy your money, but just enjoy it because you want it, not because you want to show off to somebody else.
Yeah, no one really cares what you're wearing. I mean, some people into fashion, I don't know. Nick and I obviously don't really get that whole side of things, but at the same point, we have ego lifted a lot before, so we understand that side of things, and through that and that comparison, I can see how people would ego spend on stuff like clothes and jewelry, because it's just their version of the ego lifting that we do, right?
Yeah.
And when you ego spend, you reduce your capacity for the future. I think that's the big thing with ego spending. So when you ego lift, not only do you risk injury, but you're also not having quality programming, and it's going to decrease your gains, right? So if you're properly doing some sort of strength program, maybe you're doing singles, doubles, triples at 90%, 95%, your 1 rep max. If you're ego lifting, you're doing above your 1 rep max with good form. Mm-hmm. And ego spending is kind of the same thing. You're hurting your long-term gains with your finances by not investing some of that money that you're making, and you're just hurting yourself in the future. So again, we have this comparison where it's essentially the same thing, just between weights and wealth.
Yeah. And you can also kind of psychologically harm yourself by ego spending, putting your value or placing your self-worth based on what other people think of you. Mm-hmm. That just goes down a bad road.
Yeah.
So
Agree, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, and one point I want to hammer home is that the way to avoid this is through a budget.
Wow.
Yeah, full circle.
Episode 2. That's episode 2 was having a program and a budget, and both of those things will help you avoid ego lifting and ego spending. So as you can see here at Weights and Wealth, there's a few principles that just come up over and over and over again, and we'll just keep bringing them to you in fresh perspectives and analogies until you get them and implement them into your own lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the principles are pretty basic. We're just figuring out a way to make 100 episodes to pretty much say the same thing.
Not because we want to waste our time postulating and conversing here, but because we want young people to understand these principles, young people like ourselves. I feel like we see a lot of people making these errors, and we've made these errors before, and that's why we want to help people avoid these traps. So
very well said.
Yep. If you enjoy this episode, or if you've enjoyed past episodes, please give us an honest rating or a share on social media. Or do you have any other ways that they can
or follow? You could follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok.
Do you know the handles for all of our social media?
I do not, but I can post them in the show notes.
Right. They'll be in the show notes
because they're all
below.
different. So
yep. I think Twitter is podcast W&W. Instagram is Weights and Wealth Podcast. Alex, the producer, do you have our TikTok up for us? Nope.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Oh.
Weights. It's just Weights and Wealth for TikTok.
Weights and Wealth for TikTok.
And of course, our website, weightsandwealth.com.
Yep. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.